In 1990, Philadelphia became the first city in America without access to a state mental hospital. A coalition of advocates, consumers, and families succeeded in shutting down Philadelphia State Hospital, better known as Byberry.
And we were proposing to close Byberry and not have another institution as an alternative.
Everybody in the hospital would be discharged to the community, and the supports in the community would be put in at such a level that everybody could live in the community.
Philadelphia State Hospital was infamous for an 80-year history of patient neglect, abuse, and murder.
My son had been in the hospital for 5 months, and they were about to transfer him to Philadelphia State Hospital. And my husband told my son's psychiatrist that he would rather see him dead than in a state hospital.
But the decision to close Byberry caused bitter opposition.
There was opposition from some of the parents who had sons and daughters at Philadelphia State Hospital. They had seen attempts before to provide community services for their sons and daughters, and they had failed before.
We felt that the state and the city were being very naive in that they didn't recognize the severity of illness that many persons living in Byberry had.
If we began to think of people as people first and mentally ill second, we'd run a better system.
This is a story of how age-old attitudes toward the severely mentally ill were challenged and changed. It's a story of how government can fail miserably and how government can work miracles. It's a story about the right people at the right time, fighting for the right thing. But mostly it's a story about the difference between this and this.
Mental illness has become our major public health problem. All of you are familiar with the figures which show the alarming proportions to which this problem has grown.
I'm having a good time when I'm living it. The question was brought to me, actually, why are you so forsaken in this area? Not much about being a priest, but, the question is, be good.
I was hearing voices and sounded like to me they was doing witchcraft. And I was seeing all kinds of creatures and bodies being cut up for food. And I think about that all the time. It won't go away. My mind is completely out of it. But I laugh to keep from crying.
Without a doubt, severe mental illness is a difficult disease, both to live with and to treat. The question is, how do we deal with it?
I guess I'm primarily an advocate because I've been a mental patient. I've been locked up in hospitals, state hospitals included, places like Byberry. And I ended up in the state hospital, and I didn't want to be there, and I fought. Well, at one point, to break my fighting, to make me stop fighting, they strapped me down. And I don't mean physically fought. I just was yelling, screaming, saying, I don't want to be here. They strapped me down at 4-point restraints and kept me that way and for several days until I ended up going to the bathroom all over myself. I ended up feeling so scared, that somebody was, that I was going to be hurt, that there was I was going to stay there the rest of my life. All of those feelings, and you're in a state where what you need the most is some care, and you don't get very much of it.
Throughout history, the care and treatment of mental illness was based on a combination of what was known about it, which was very little, what could be done about it, which was not much, and how people in general felt about it. When the mentally ill were thought to be possessed by evil spirits, treatment was either torture or death. When they became a nuisance, they were put onto ships of fools and drifted from port to port.
Difficulty in understanding and treating these illnesses has led to some of the stigma or fear of the mentally ill. I think that their overall behaviors, that is, the symptoms themselves of the illnesses that they have been frightening to people.
But there has also been compassion through the ages, and many mentally ill people were cared for by their families and local communities. In the Belgian town of Gale, the mentally ill have been integrated into foster homes for centuries.
Here, for example, are 2 of the more than 3,000 patients in Gale. These 2 are on a farm. They earn their keep, but more important, They feel that someone needs them, and they belong.
But on the whole, large asylums became the rule. The public was protected and mental illness was hidden away, removed from sight. In these asylums, mentally ill people were shackled, sometimes for years. They were lowered into snake pits in the hope that the shock would cure them. They were put on public display and for the price of admission, beaten and tortured. The most notorious asylum was London's Bethlehem Hospital, crowded, noisy, and filthy. Its nickname was Bedlam, a name which soon stood for chaos, confusion, and wildness. Philadelphia State Hospital had a nickname too, Byberry. Byberry was the section of Philadelphia where the hospital was built, far from the center of town. In Philadelphia, it was a word that haunted, conjuring up unspeakable horrors. Children were told, if you don't behave, you'll end up in Byberry. From its beginnings in 1907, Byberry was in the hands of Philadelphia's corrupt political machine. Money for the hospital was siphoned off. Patronage workers filled the ranks. One worker choked a patient until the patient's eyes popped out. The worker was fired, but a politician soon reinstated him with a pay raise. Other staffers were criminals who were given the choice of jail or work at Byberry. Patients were neglected, abused, and died at the hands of workers or other patients. Byberry deteriorated, and in the fall of 1938, the state of Pennsylvania took over and renamed it Philadelphia State Hospital. The first state superintendent described Byberry as a medieval pest house, but the state would do no better.
The Allied armed forces have been ordered to suspend offensive action.
Newsmen rush the president's report to a waiting world. And through the early evening, Tuesday, August 14th, the fateful news is flashed. The end of fighting, the dawn of peace. It's official. It's all over. It's total victory.
The Second World War brought a new awareness of mental illness. Many draftees were rejected because of mental disorders, and returning servicemen were treated for shock.
Son, you're back now in a world full of civilians, just like I was after 1918. It's not going to be easy for you, but don't let it get under your skin too much.
The federal government canceled its contract with Byberry to treat servicemen because of its horrible conditions. Books and magazines compared life at Byberry to Nazi concentration camps. Byberry held its ground.
Byberry seemed to have been cursed. There were well-intentioned efforts to make it a reasonable institution that cared for people with mental illness, and they never stuck.
In the late 1940s, Philadelphia State Hospital was home to 6,000 patients. It was overcrowded, understaffed, and underfunded. Treatment was virtually non-existent. State-of-the-art mental care was warehousing.
It seems not too much to say that we're on the verge of an entirely new era in the treatment of mental illness.
While in the past, we have been accustomed to speak of psychiatric hospitals or state hospitals as mere custodial care institutions, this is now all in the process of changing.
In 1952, a revolution took place with the discovery of the psychotropic drug Thorazine. For the first time in history, patients could bring their symptoms under control.
Tell me why you came back to the hospital this time. What was wrong? What did the voices say to you, Sally? Sally, it's been 3 weeks now since you've come to the hospital, and during that time you've gotten the medicine. How have you been feeling since you came here?
Well, I was so sick, but now I feel fine.
You feel much better now. And what are you going to do when you leave the hospital?
Well, I think now when I go home, maybe I don't have all the children with me for a while.
I see.
When not given properly, these drugs have side effects in some patients. Drugs with fewer side effects would not be developed until 40 years later. But more importantly, psychotropic drugs provided the first vision of mental health care beyond warehousing.
All
hospitals for the treatment of mental disease have many problems. Sometimes we despair of ever solving them.
Problems common to state hospitals throughout the country.
With 2 student nurses and maybe 3 attendants, we have all we can do to bathe the patients, get them to cafeteria, take them to the doctors, give them their medications, and try to keep the place clean.
And I'm the psychiatrist out here. I'm one psychiatrist for over 600 patients. What can you expect?
By the late 1950s, most state hospitals had problems. Overcrowding and lack of money prevailed. At that time, Byberry had 7,000 patients. Because the new drugs worked so well, governments began to discharge patients with an eye to saving money.
In the 50s, a person was discharged from a state hospital, given a new suit of clothes, $25, and an appointment at the outpatient clinic. That's not support. That sets vulnerable people up for failure.
The next day at the President's news conference.
In 1963, the Kennedy administration proposes community mental health centers for the severely mentally ill, and mass deinstitutionalization begins. Over 350,000 patients are discharged between 1965 and 1980. Many patients did well in the community. But on the whole, neither the commitment nor the funding was there to provide adequate services in the community for the severely mentally ill. All of this created a new class of homeless. Some former patients committed violent acts. Others were victims of violence. It was against this backdrop that the closing of Philadelphia State Hospital was first considered.
And I remember a friend and I going through it one day where she actually was sticking to the floor where she lost her shoe because of the dried urine on the floor and had never been cleaned up.
The other thing that folks often heard about PSH was it was the dregs of the dregs. Some people were buried there and people just literally forgot about them because they were a challenging population of people.
We call it milkweed. Have you ever seen milkweed? Yes, I have. Uh-huh. Well, I have some here, and I'd like to show you this. This is milkweed. And look at this. When you open it, look what's inside. Isn't that pretty? Take some of them out in your hand. Take some in your hand.
As bad as Byberry was, most of the staff were decent people who dedicated themselves to helping their patients.
Some good things were done there. Some very, very dedicated professionals learned their craft there. And to work there, and even choosing to stay there, gave you some indication as to the dedication that they felt, because they weren't very well paid, but many of them really cared for those patients who were there, and that shouldn't be forgotten.
But in 1986, reports started coming out of Byberry about rampant physical and sexual abuse of patients in one particular ward. One of the victims was a young woman named Anna. She told her mother, who started her own investigation, quietly, secretly, because staff members were threatened into silence. Information was smuggled out to Anna's mother that proved the allegations. Reports had been stonewalled. The guilty went unpunished. Evil had permission. The abuse reports were waiting on Robert Casey's desk when he became governor of Pennsylvania in early 1987. Soon after, he appoints a Blue Ribbon Committee to investigate Philadelphia State Hospital. In September 1987, the Blue Ribbon Report confirms a lackadaisical attitude toward patient abuse at Byberry. It states that management is disorganized and inefficient, and that patients are not provided with even an adequate level of basic care. But the last straw was a casual remark made by a Byberry guard to Blue Ribbon investigators. As they were leaving, he said, "See you again in 4 years." This, more than anything, revealed the basic truth about Philadelphia State Hospital. It had resisted reform for decades. Immediately, top management was removed. 4 workers were fired for abuse. And on December 7, 1987, Governor Casey announces that Byberry will be closed within 2 years. Anna was receiving innovative therapy at Byberry that successfully targeted the cause of her mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder caused by early childhood sexual abuse. For the first time in her life, she agreed with her diagnosis and had hope. Here she was at one of the worst hospitals, getting the best treatment. But her efforts to expose patient abuse also caused Byberry to disintegrate, and she never again received this kind of treatment. A few years later, Anna committed suicide. When the closing was announced, the population of Philadelphia State Hospital had dropped to 500 patients. Criminal or extremely ill patients would be transferred to other facilities. Some 400 would be discharged into the community.
It was clear that the people in Byberry, Philadelphia State Hospital, needed programs. They just could not be transferred from years and years and years of institutionalization to being on their own in the community.
A group of professionals was charged by the state to create a plan for new community services. For a full year, the Resources Subcommittee worked to design a plan flexible enough to meet any need.
So we didn't describe model XYZ when we developed the plan. We talked about the general principles that should exist and the general types of things that should exist within a particular need.
In early 1988, Estelle Richmond came to Pennsylvania to oversee the closing of Byberry for the state.
Many people still feel that putting people in psychiatric hospitals is the right thing to do. But most of us know that isn't the way of a world that's creating to give people chances, to build on people's strengths. That was the vision.
But in light of past failures, the question was, would Philadelphia State Hospital be closed responsibly? In April 1988, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of the patients at Byberry.
We filed the litigation essentially to make sure that the people who lived in Byberry, if they did not need to be hospitalized, were provided alternative community services, and they were the kind of services that could meet the needs of people with severe mental illness, not boarding homes with minimal supervision, but really intensive programs where people would receive the support they needed so they could stay in the community.
And what the lawsuit basically was like a faucet. When things were moving too quickly, i.e., and we were worried about people being dumped, we would tighten the faucet to slow it down. When things were moving too slowly and that the money was being threatened, we would be threatening to go back in and raise more hell.
Little by little, patients began to be discharged, and in November of '88, the state closes admissions to Byberry. However, adequate community programs are not in place, and the city's mental health system goes into chaos.
I remember being in tremendous anguish about the fact that people were just on the streets, who were severely ill and a danger to themselves and others, and there was nowhere to go.
But I think that it's something all of us missed the boat on, the state, the city, and those of us who were involved in the planning process. And none of us understood the consequences of closing admissions. It seemed like a very rational thing at the time. You're going to close the hospital. Of course, you're not going to admit anybody else to it.
Everyone soon realized that plans had to be made not only for the patients at Byberry, but also for people who would have gone to Byberry had it not closed.
It's a very difficult thing. You have someone in the community who, if they have appropriate supports, won't need to be hospitalized, but without those supports is going to need to be hospitalized. So if you close the hospital, where does this person go?
The answer needed to be a tripling of our advocacy efforts to make sure that we got the services in the community.
But early in 1989, the state and the city dropped a bomb. They revealed another plan for the closing that was conceived in secret, a plan that proposed too few services and not enough money.
I can remember feeling like, was our whole planning process just a sham so that, the state could say they had a public planning process, but we had not yet even officially submitted to them our plan.
And I remember looking at the budget, and I remember saying, there's no money here. I was like in shock. I'm sitting there going like, there's like no money here. They're talking like $16 million. That's going to do nothing.
We were appalled because the operating budget for that current fiscal year to operate Byberry was $39 million, and we had been given the promise that this time people were not just going to be dumped out of a state hospital, but the money used to run that facility would follow those patients into the community.
I just could not believe, after all the work we did and my enthusiasm over the closing, I was going to let families down here. 16 was not going to do a damn thing for these folks. But I can remember standing up and screaming at this meeting at everybody. I screamed at John.
I remember saying, Loretta, why are you yelling at me? I didn't come up with this plan. I don't agree with it any more than you do.
I was just so frustrated.
That meeting really began the life of the Coalition for Responsible Closing of Philadelphia State Hospital, because it was very clear to us that unless we had a forceful advocacy group, we were going to be sold down the river, all for the sake of saving money.
The Coalition for the Responsible Closing of Philadelphia State Hospital was an unprecedented alliance of every major interest group in the mental health system: consumers, families, advocates, psychiatrists, and providers. Before, these groups were at odds, but now they banded together to force the state into closing Byberry responsibly.
As we met, we began to realize we had this one single overriding concern.
There were a whole lot of pulling and shoving and hair pulling, but in the end, we always came up with the united position.
And when we went up together saying the same thing, it was very, very difficult to resist us.
We, as the lawyers, were not part of the coalition, but it was very important that the litigation and the activities of the coalition go in tandem.
And one of the things we did very early on is we made a demand, and we demanded that there be $50 million for closing the state hospital. So everybody absolutely thought we had gone off our medication at that point.
In March of '89, the Resources Subcommittee, now essentially the Coalition, submits its plan. It proposes a comprehensive yet small-scale flexible system that can easily tailor itself to the individual needs of each consumer. The Coalition now fights for its plan, for more funding, and for more time to develop services. That summer, more reports come out of Byberry. Because of the closing, qualified staff are leaving the hospital, putting the patients at greater risk. There are also reports of continuing patient abuse. Then, in August '89, a Byberry patient who was discharged into a community program is found dead in the river. A week later, a second discharged patient is also found dead in the river.
Tyrone, and Joe, boy. Do I think we did what we could? Yeah. Do I wish we could have done more? Sure.
I can recall coming into the administration building and seeing almost the entire administration openly weeping.
You can imagine people's self-doubts and people wondering how they could have done things differently. And these were people that they knew and they loved.
I said, I feel like I did it myself to them. Because it just felt that there should have been some way that we could have prevented this from happening.
Unfortunately, mental illness is a fatal disease in many cases, and I know from my own history that I've been suicidal, that there's times I've tried to take my life very seriously. You can't create such a cocoon around people that they also don't get a chance to grow. If you create that, then they're dead anyway. So you don't want to see people die from suicide or kill themselves, but you also don't want to see them die from the kind of institutional cocoon you can create, supposedly to protect them.
On August 30, 1989, Governor Casey calls a halt to the closing of Philadelphia State Hospital. The same day, a third discharged patient attempts suicide in the river. 2 weeks later, a fourth is found dead in the water.
We needed to go back to the drawing boards and see whether or not we still were on the right track.
One thing that deaths taught them was that there really were some very sick people here and some very aggressive kind of programming needed to go into place. You can't discharge people and then develop services. You need to develop the services first